I am asking for your forgiveness that we did not manage to bring them back still alive. We were close, but we didn't achieve it. And I would also like to once again repeat this evening, Israel will not stand silently doing nothing facing this massacre. Hamas will pay a very heavy price for that in the war against the axis of evil. And in this specific war against Hamas, and also in the north, we have set 4 goals: to eradicate Hamas, to bring back all of our hostages, to make sure that Gaza no longer poses a threat over Israel, and to allow the people of Israel living in the north return home safely. 3 of these goals go through one place, and that is the Philadelphia corridor. It is the conduit of oxygen and armament for Hamas. And I would like to devote several minutes in order to explain the meaning of the Philadelphia corridor. What is it? What is its significance for Israel's security? What is its significance and importance in guaranteeing that we won't face another October 7th and another October 7th and another October 7th, just as Hamas promised that it would do? So first of all, I'd like to show you what we had over the years until we pulled out of there. This is the state of Israel, this is Egypt, and you can see the Gaza Strip here. The distance from Tel Aviv isn't that big, from Beersheba and from the area surrounding the border. Of course, there's hardly any distance, but we had an international border going from the sea all the way down to Eilat. This was Israel's international border. If you could blow it up a bit. So if we see this now, as we zoom in, you can see that throughout these borders, the maritime border is under our control, but the land, the ground border isn't under our control. Ashkelon, Sderot, the Kibbutzim, the Kerem Shalom passage, and here you have the Rafah crossing and the Philadelphia corridor, all of them under our control. And this is what happened when we pulled out of Gaza. This is what happened. The borders remained in our hands. They tried breaking through the maritime border, remember the Marmara and some other events and flotillas, but we weathered them all. So nothing could come wherever we were in control of the borders. But once we pulled out of the Philadelphia corridor. See, this is the border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt. And once we pulled out of there was no obstacle left from a massive infusion of weapons and means of warfare and machines for manufacturing weapons and machines for digging tunnels, all of that under the auspices of Iran, with the funding of Iran. So all of these things that you see here came into Gaza. So Gaza became this huge threat over Israel because there was no barrier here. There was nothing stopping this. This is what happened. So now the question remains, and people ask me this question, well, if it was that bad, right? How come you didn't conquer it? Why didn't you conquer it? And the answer is that we constantly tried to harm, to attack, of course, immediately after the disengagement, this armament, and of course, even more so under the time when Morsi was in regime, in power, but also with Mubarak as well. But we fought them. And there were a series of wars or campaigns. I led 3 of these campaigns: Pillar of Defense, Guardian of the Walls, and Protective Edge. We fought it. And this, of course, led to a situation in which we killed off thousands of terrorists and senior ranking commanders, the chief of general staff of Hamas, Jabri, but there wasn't national or international legitimacy to go inside of Gaza, to conquer it, to reconquer the Rafah crossing and the Philadelphia corridor. There wasn't any national consensus or international agreement to that. Now, the importance of the Philadelphia corridor, it's not something I'm just saying now. I already said that 20 years ago. Sharon declared the disengagement at the end of 2003, and then a few months later, on March 26, 2004, I described what are my minimal demands, and I said my first condition is control over all the crossings into the Gaza Strip and from it, from the land, from the air, and from the sea. The Philadelphia corridor, which separates between the Gaza Strip and Egypt, will not be evacuated. If Israel cedes control over it, that's what I said back then Gaza will turn into a terrorist enclave. And when I resigned from the government, when I realized that they were going for the disengagement, that they were going to uproot Jewish settlements, communities, I handed in my resignation later, and I said to Prime Minister Sharon at the time, I said, as a minimum, I demanded that we keep the Philadelphia corridor in our hands. So it's not something new. It was obvious that if we don't have this corridor, they will arm themselves, they will create a monster. The axis of evil needs the Philadelphia corridor, and for the same reason, we must have control over the Philadelphia corridor. Hamas insists for exactly this reason that we won't be there, and it's exactly for this reason that I insist that we do stay there. The presence in the Philadelphia corridor is, first of all, a political strategic issue. We must fixate the fact that we're there. And people say to me, okay, so we pull out. What's the big deal? We'll pull out for 42 days and then we'll come back. And I said, okay, yeah, I've heard that once before. That's what people said when we pulled out of Lebanon. They said with the first rocket, with the first missile, we will re-enter and conquer this territory. And we will have vast, massive international support from that. Well, thousands of missiles have been launched from Lebanon, and there was no international support for that. And then when we pulled out of the Gaza Strip, when we just did this now, they said, what's the problem? With the first rocket, we'll go in. Well, the first rocket that is smuggled either beneath the ground or launched from above the ground will go in. Well, 20 years had passed and we didn't go in. So all these people who say that it's not such a problem to go in, well, there is a problem. Definitely, big time. It's not easy to do that. And it's not just a military tactical question, it's a question of a tremendous diplomatic international pressure exerted by the whole world. If we pull out, then there will be pressure not to go back in, not to return. And I'm telling you how difficult it was for us to overcome the international pressure. I weathered that pressure to go into Rafah. And look at the price we paid. There was massive pressure. The ICC, they brought it up a day or two before the decision. They knew we were about to decide that there was a weapons embargo that is continuing to spread. We paid with the lives of our soldiers. But that is nothing in comparison to what we will be targeted with if we pull out. And everybody understands the importance of this, but they don't support us. They want us to end the war. This is what they all want us to do, to end the war. And this corridor is different from all other places, from all other corridors. It is central. It will determine our entire future. It has tremendous importance for us. But the world that wants to see the war come to an end, that's the last thing in the world that they want us to do, to go in there, and there will be tremendous pressure exerted us in the Security Council, and I'm not going to specify other things because I don't want to give anybody ideas. Why? Why should we walk into this trap? So they say that it's possible. Well, I say that this will not bring back the hostages. On the contrary, I would like to tell you that when we entered Philadelphia, it was only then that we started feeling a change. For long months after the first hostage deal, Hamas wouldn't budge. They kept insisting you have to declare in advance about the end of the war, you have to commit to pull out of the Gaza Strip, and what that actually meant was that they could go back to be in control of Gaza. And the first crack, and of course, this doesn't lead to any deal or the release of any hostages. And the first crack appeared once we entered Rafah and took over the Philadelphia corridor and the Rafah crossing, because that's their oxygen tube. So, and then things started to change. Then they kind of withdrew when they thought that perhaps Iran would come to their rescue or Hezbollah. And now they're hoping that international pressure or domestic pressure would save them. But the fact is that the first effective change we saw towards a deal, what made a deal possible, was once we seized the Philadelphia corridor. And when you leave it, you walk out and you don't come back. I've already said that we're not pulling out for 42 days, but because we're going to stay there for 42 years. That's how I was quoted. It's not what I said, but I know that if we leave, we probably won't be able to return for 42 years. We left and we couldn't return for 20 years. And after, we sacrificed and fought, and now we have them by their necks. We caught them by their throats, and this could bring back the hostages. And that also, by the way, prevents smuggling hostages above the ground. They could they could take them during these 42 days and take them into Sinai. It's just a few meters from there to smuggle them. They cross the border and that's it. They disappear. They could all of a sudden pop up in Iran or Yemen? Absolutely not. So after we managed to get all that, we're not going to forgo this. We're not going to step into this terrible trap, which is not a military tactical question. It's a diplomatic strategic issue. And just some of the security elements in Israel said we can pull out of the Gaza Strip and no problem. We can pull out of Lebanon and we will return immediately. I think that after October 7th, we've learned to be a bit more cautious in our assessments and to take into account all of the elements of the picture. Now, regretfully, even though we are fully committed, and I am fully committed to a deal, to advance a hostage deal, unfortunately, we haven't seen any similar response from Hamas. We have agreed to the outline presented by President Biden on May 31st. We agreed to what they called or referred to as the final bridging proposal on August 16th. We agreed to all of that, but Hamas refused to the first one, and then they refused to the second one. The representative Al-Khia, he said yesterday, withdrawal from the entire Gaza Strip and end to the war. Leave us in government. That's their position. They haven't budged. Like I said, they budged a little bit, but once they think that they identify a certain weakness on our side, or maybe if there is some pressure that could break us, they immediately bounce back. So this is why we're not going to pull out. The importance of the Philadelphia corridor is cardinal. It's crucial for bringing back the hostages and to also ensure that Hamas is crushed and that Gaza will not resume to being a threat on Israel. So this is why we've made it clear that this is our position. But from amongst us, we started hearing voices from inside the cabinet, ministers in the government. And they said, no problem. We can pull out, even though we've already decided not to pull out. So this is why I had to bring it officially to the cabinet for a vote and to anchor this and to make it clear that there are certain things we won't compromise on. I want to clarify, I'm flexible. I'm flexible wherever I can be flexible. I do not insist where I can show flexibility, but I'm also not flexible on these places where I must insist. And this is something we must all insist on. Otherwise, we'll once again have a terrible disaster like what happened. The axis of evil needs the Philadelphia corridor, the Philadelphia axis, and we need to hold on to it. And that's why after we agreed in cabinet, the resolution was passed, I was stunned. I was simply stunned. Because I heard from amongst us that some people are saying that we can pull out. But when was that said? After they had murdered 6 of our hostages in cold blood? What kind of a message does this send to Hamas? What kind of a message does this send? Murder hostages and you'll get concessions in return. I'm saying that it's completely legitimate in discussions. Every minister must voice his or her opinion. Anybody who knows a little bit about these discussions, everybody knows the truth. I encourage everyone to speak their mind. I don't block anyone. I don't prevent anyone from speaking their mind. On the contrary, but once a decision is reached, it's binding. Membership in the cabinet is not as you request program. Once a decision is reached, it's binding for everyone, and the message that we are going to change an essential strategic decision, or that in general that we are changing decisions under the pressure of the murder and massacre of our hostages, it's a terrible mistake. It would serve as an incentive for terrorism and for more murders. So that's why it's not going to happen. It's simply not going to happen. Hamas, of course, they think that it is going to happen as long as they see this rift among us. And by the way, that's not new. They are using this tactics. They've been using it for an entire year now. Please show it now. Let's go back one. First of all, this is what we want to see. The IDF stays here and stops. And in order to get us out, not just of there, but from Gaza in general, they are utilizing a tactics of splitting us up, weakening us, and ultimately leading to our succumbing. How do they do so? This is a document with instructions found in Hamas tunnels by our own soldiers. They found this document. By the way, in the media, they said that it's Sinwar. I cannot promise you that it's Sinwar, but it's Sinwar, but definitely senior Hamas leaders. This is the original document in Arabic, and this is its translation into Hebrew to increase the dissemination of images and videos of hostages because of the psychological pressure that creates, to do everything possible in order to increase psychological pressure on Gallant, to continue the line that Netanyahu is responsible for what had happened, to undermine the Israeli narrative as if the ground offensive serves the return of the hostages. Word for word. And that's Hamas's strategy. They want to split us apart. They want to break us down. They are relying on an internal rift. They think that the majority of Israelis will follow this, but they're wrong. I said a while ago, when there was this argument about those who refuse to do reservist duty, I said I thought it was a terrible argument, because it creates an expectation among our enemies that we're weak and rifted and we will give in. And now this creates the same illusion that we will surrender on these crucial events that have an impact on our future, that could risk our future, that can create this rift among us, and that we will surrender. I will not surrender to this pressure. I know how to withstand pressure, even greater pressures, and our people, our nation won't surrender to this pressure. Most of the people understand, and it doesn't matter what you see on the screens, on TV. And I say to Sinwar, forget about it. It's not going to happen. We need to stand united to insist on this vital interest. We must act together so that the other side understands, just like they understood about putting an end to the war. They need to understand that we're not going to give up on the crucial things. We do give in on other matters that aren't that crucial. I gave a lot of flexibility throughout the year, but anything that's crucial, we insist on. And once Hamas understands that, once they understand, there's going to be a deal. And once they understand that, We will ensure our existence and our future. Together we stand, together we fight, and together, God willing, we will win.